Hi there, this is Dr. Monica Agarwal. Welcome to another episode of Seeking Voices, exploring the science of health and healing. It's so great to see you today. I have a great guest today I'm really excited to talk to, named Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. Dr. Brad is a professor of exercise science at Lehman College in the Bronx, New York, where he serves as the graduate director of Human Performance and Fitness Program. How cool is that? He formerly served as a sports nutritionist for the New Jersey Devils hockey organization. He has published more than 300 peer-reviewed scientific papers on various different exercise and sports nutrition-related topics. He's authored a seminal textbook called Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy. He was the recipient of the 2016 Dwight D. Eisenhower Fitness Award presented by the United States Sports Academy for outstanding achievement in fitness and contributions to the growth and development of sports fitness through outstanding leadership activity, as well as earning the 2018 National Strength and Conditioning Association Young Investigator of the Year Award. I'm really excited to talk to Brad today. I want to hear all about muscle hypertrophy, but I want to hear a lot about how to build muscle at different ages, how to change and maximize your VO2, what are the benefits of cold water immersion, what's heart rate recovery, and is it important, and are these watches at all any good? Hopefully these are questions interest you and look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you, Brad. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I figure we just get started. I've already sort of told the audience about how great you are and all the great things you've done. But I think viewers are going to and listeners are going to have a lot of questions for a person like you. So I thought maybe you tell us by starting out and letting the audience get to know you. Like how did you get into this, and what are you doing at Lehman College? And tell us about that.
Sure. I'm a professor and researcher at Lehman College in the Bronx, New York. My primary research focus is on muscle hypertrophy and strength and power to some extent, various strengthening activities. But the primary focus has been on hypertrophy, basically what makes muscles grow, what are the best strategies to enhance muscle development. And I've published close to 400 papers on the topic. So that just shows that I've been around for a long time.
How'd you get into this?
Well, I actually had a quite windy road to get there, but I was a personal trainer starting out in a competitive natural bodybuilder. And long story short, I started really getting into the science of building muscle, and it kind of made me want to discuss the scientific aspects, and my clients really didn't care about how to get jacked, how to build muscle. They just wanted to get muscle. So I started to gravitate towards teaching, and I got a job in a vocational school teaching to start, and I really enjoyed that. And ultimately, it led me to go back and get my PhD and get a full-time position. But I'm living my dream now.
Oh, that's a neat thing to say. I think it's such a unique skill set, actually. I think that there are very few people that have crossed over from maybe the personal training desire to build muscle to actually trying to understand the science behind it, which is something that I admire about you and been curious about. There are more cardiologists, frankly, than there are people that do sort of the work that you're doing, which I think is really neat. So I thought maybe we'd start with that question. So your work is on muscle hypertrophy. So what is that? And is that our goal? Is our goal to have muscle hypertrophy?
Well, so what is muscle hypertrophy? It's the increase in size of a muscle. Whether your goal is to have muscle hypertrophy, certainly having larger muscles has benefits for people, but it's always going to be specific to the individual. If you're a marathon runner, no, you would not want to be getting muscle hypertrophy because that would be weighing you down when you're running very long distances. So for certain athletes, that could be a detriment. But for the vast majority of the general public, which I assume is your audience here, having larger muscles is certainly a benefit. Having larger muscles, first of all, there's a direct relationship between strength and hypertrophy. So having larger muscles will ultimately, to some extent, improve your ability to create force, which is going to have important implications for activities of daily living. Having larger muscles acts as a sink for glucose, so it really can help to offset diabetes or insulin resistance. Having larger muscles actually are secretory organs, secretory tissues, and they secrete various what are called myokines into the system that have various health-producing effects. So I can go on, but
but that's really important, because I think sometimes people will say, certainly people that I see and work around will say, well, maybe that's not the goal. It's not, the goal isn't to build or increase the size of your muscle. But I think it's important what you said is that, we don't often think of the muscle as anything other than sort of a force builder, but that's pointing out that it's a secretory organ, I think, that it secretes and that it actually improves glucose metabolism, I think are pretty important pieces of the puzzle. So
yeah, I just touched on, there's many other important factors that muscles do as well. So I mean, yes, but muscles are very essential to our overall health, and a lack of what's called atrophy. So hypertrophy is the opposite really of atrophy, which is muscles getting smaller, which will happen to people as they age if they don't do some type of resistance training, which we can get into.
So what other, what other things should we think about when we think about muscles? Like, is the goal so one of the things that we're bad at, or at least we were bad at for years as cardiologists, is our guidelines didn't really focus on strength training. And so we focused mostly on cardiovascular fitness. So, 50 to 75 minutes, 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week is really what we say. But in the more recent guidelines, in the last few iterations as cardiologists, we now say to add in strength training. So we came to the party a little bit late as cardiologists because we didn't really understand the impact of strength training. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like, is cardiovascular training enough? Do you think that strength training is helpful? And because as we age, we all know that there's more muscle loss or sarcopenia. So what do you talk about when you talk about strength training and the number of times per week and the importance of it, especially as we age?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. So I'd first say, no, I am somewhat biased as a muscle researcher, but I would say that again, this is personal opinion, that muscle strengthening activities are the most important activity you can do. I think it's not to diminish, because people always say, well, you need to pick one. You never need to pick one. I mean, so certainly I think that doing cardiovascular exercise is synergistic from a health standpoint, and even from to some extent, a muscle building standpoint. But it's very important to do. But if you only could do one thing, strengthening exercises give you the most bang for your buck. So they will improve your, first of all, functional capacity. A loss of independence it's not only devastating emotionally, but it ultimately hastens the onset of morbidity and mortality. So that if you're not doing strengthening, and cardiovascular exercise will do very little, have minimal effect on your ability to build muscle.
And also balance, right? So one of the things that we often forget about is the importance of muscle building for balance.
Correct. Yeah, so muscle building will certainly improve your balance. It improves bone. It's because the muscles pull on the bones to create movement. So when you're doing muscle strengthening exercise, it actually has important effects on bone building and certainly offsetting the loss of bone. So important to realize that after the age of about 30 or so, if you are sedentary, you will start to lose muscle mass. There's muscle wasting will occur. Somewhere between 30 and 40, it's somewhat different based on genetics and how sedentary you might be and other factors. But you lose about 0.5% of your muscle per year. That'll go on till you're about 50. Then the research shows that you'll start to lose more. It goes up to around 1%. And then when you go into your 70s and beyond, it can be 2 to 3% of the muscle per year. It's a condition called sarcopenia. It's very well established. We're very well investigated. And this is a primary reason why people lose their functional independence, and it has effects on your posture. I mentioned earlier about how muscle itself is a secretory tissue, and that it promotes all sorts of health-related benefits by the myokines that it secretes. If you have less muscle, that's going to have negative impacts on other health markers. And there's a qualitative aspect too, that muscle, if you actually look at the muscle tissue, so there's MRIs, really displays this beautifully, where you look at a young, healthy 20-year-old's muscle, and you compare it to a 60 or 70-year-old who's been sedentary. And not only is the muscle much smaller, but there's this infiltration of fat. So there are various lipids, so triglyceride accumulation within the muscle. And that has real detrimental effects on insulin function. It's been shown quite well to have real impediments to your insulin sensitivity. So again, we can go on and on with this. We could take up the whole hour just talking about the benefits, but I think that would not be time well spent.
Well, but this is important. So one of the things I would ask then is, which is what most people are worried about is, first of all, I thought the data said, the muscle breakdown starts in your 50s. So for you to say 30s to 40s really was like, oh God. So, but then when you think about that, what is it that people, Americans, should be doing? So in other words, maybe you didn't exercise for 30 years. Can you make it up? Like, can you kind of come back and start at 30 and sort of make up for, or is there a way to sort of build up enough so that as you lose muscle that we are going to be okay in our 80s? Like, how do you advise people as they age to keep up with this process?
So there is good research, and our group carried out a meta-analysis on quote unquote the oldest of the old. These are individuals 75 plus years. And we looked at all the studies on muscle strength and muscle mass, muscle hypertrophy. And there was really incredible evidence that in 8 to 12 weeks in these oldest of old, they saw very large gains. In strength in particular goes up exponentially, but in muscle mass as well. And by the way, there is a direct relationship between hypertrophy and strength. But strength also has a lot of neural effects, nerve-related effects. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. You don't see for every X amount of muscle you gain, you're going to get X increase in strength. So I think that's important. But yeah, so certainly it's very possible to build muscle at any age. And I'd even go back to the early 90s. A seminal study was done on nonagenarians in a nursing home. So those 90 years old. And they took a cohort of 10 individuals. This was Dr. Fitterone's study, really incredible work. And they put them on 8 weeks, it was, I believe, an 8-week program, of just doing the leg extensions, which is a very basic resistance training movement. 3 days a week for 8 weeks. There was a 150% increase in strength, a 50% increase in functional capacity in these individuals. And here's the coolest thing, 3 out of the 10 subjects were able to walk without the use of their canes after 8 weeks. So again, just huge benefits. Now, to your question, can you gain back everything you had? It really depends upon, likely not. Even if you continue to exercise your whole life, let's say you started when you were 20 bodybuilding and you were doing that the rest of your life, there's going to be some mild losses over time just because of your hormones will change over time and other factors. But you can retain, if you start in your 20s, you can retain the vast majority of your muscle into your old age. And that's been well established in bodybuilders from the early days. So you would have fairly minimal loss. And certainly not, you might not be able to pose on stage with 20-year-olds as a bodybuilder, but you're going to be able to carry out functions that are better than what many 20-year-olds who don't resistance train do. So that's, now, as to your ability to recapture it, it really depends upon how sedentary you are. I mean, if you're doing a lot of physical activities of daily living, you can stave off some of that muscle loss. Certainly, if you're not resistance training, you're going to see this sarcopenia will set in, or at least to some extent, muscle wasting will set in. So this is where it gets very nuanced. And what I would say is it's never too late to start, but the earlier you start, the better.
No, I love that. So I love people to hear that in particular, that it's never too late, and that maybe you're not going to get all of it back, but boy, could you really change your trajectory by adding in those muscle components, and the earlier the better for sure. And what a neat study that was done after 8 weeks, and 3 out of 10 not using canes is so cool. It just makes you remember that, our body wants to do better. Like, it wants to heal, it wants to do well. And by giving it the right tools, we can do so much. It's incredible. So to that end, as we age, there's this debate, or, there's a whole lot of conversation in the community and the world about protein. And Americans are arguably maybe obsessed with protein, and sort of the protein and the drinking and the supplements. And, but we do need to focus on protein. And as we age, do we need more protein? And does taking in more protein as we age help?
So the answer to all those questions is yes. Now, of course, it's a matter of the amounts. So I want to start off by saying that my discussion will be specific to healthy individuals, because when you're talking about disease states, there can be confounding issues, and that's something that is beyond the scope of a discussion like this.
Okay.
Certainly, having kidney problems in particular can mitigate the protein intake, or can offset benefits. There can be the cost benefit of that may be of issue.
So that's an important point about the kidney. If you have kidney disease, your protein intake might have to be modulated or adjusted. So, what Brad is going to tell us about, or Dr. Brad's going to tell us about, we want to kind of think about is not, it should be treated individually if you have a medical issue.
Exactly. And you'd want to speak with a doctor, cardiologist, or nephrologist. But that said, so on a general basis, as you age, as people age, they become what's called anabolically insensitive, meaning, and this is one of the reasons why as you get older too, your response to resistance training will be somewhat muted. So a 60-year-old, even if they've been lifting the whole life, the anabolic response, how much protein synthesis they have after the session is over, will be somewhat lower than it is in the younger individuals. It becomes harder to build muscle as you get older. And same thing with protein. So there's somewhat of a insensitivity to protein intake, and I don't know how deep a dive you want to get into this, but on a very basic level, there is a essential amino acid called leucine, which is considered critical to kickstarting the muscle building process. And there's this threshold that's perceived to exist, and it requires that a certain amount of leucine is consumed to maximally kickstart the anabolic process. And if you're below that threshold, you do not achieve this maximal anabolic response. And that is increased, long story short, as you age, this leucine threshold is increased because your body is desensitized to it. And really what that means is that you have a higher need for per dose protein. So the amount of protein you're taking in a given meal is higher than it would be for a younger individual. Now, a couple of things along these lines. If you're resistance training, the research is pretty clear. You not only need higher amounts than the RDA, but you need about double the amount of the RDA. Even without resistance training, there is evidence that older individuals need more than the RDA to offset, at least to some extent, sarcopenia, muscle wasting. But I would say my response to that is everyone needs to be resistance training, so we shouldn't even care what people who don't resistance train would need. How much is that? Well, the literature shows roughly 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, and that is, if someone is obese, that doesn't factor in a lot of extra body fat. So that would be your quote unquote your ideal weight, which would be what's your body fat for a male, somewhere around 12 to 15% body fat, and for a woman somewhere between 20 to 25% body fat. If you're more than that, you just need to scale that down. You don't need to take in, if you're 400 pounds and 300 of that is. But
what age, Brad, is that for? What age are you saying 1.6 grams per kg for every all comers?
It's so it's not been shown that it lessens for. So yeah, this is for generally everyone, because most of the studies on these are protein synthesis studies. They've been done in younger individuals, but if anything, it would seem that the older individuals need more. I've not seen good research that older individuals would up that amount, would be required to take in more of that amount, but they certainly wouldn't be taking in less for optimal. Now, this is for optimal. What I'm talking about here is optimal muscle protein synthesis. Doesn't mean if you're below that, you're not going to build muscle. And, if you're, here's what I would say, as you start getting lower and lower towards your RDA, your muscle building capacity will be blunted. I think a minimum certainly would be around 1.2 grams per kilogram. When you start getting below that, so, and by the way, 0.8 grams is the RDA. So as you start scaling up, you're going to increase your muscle building capacity. I think that would be the best way to say it, and then it would plateau somewhere around 1.6 grams per kilogram. If you take in more, your body is not going to be able to utilize that additional protein.
So that's interesting because, we use, when I think about this topic and sort of some of the general guidelines, it's like 0.8 to sort of stabilize, 0.8 grams per kg. And then for seniors, we say 1 to 1.2 grams per kg. And 1.6 seems higher than that. I mean, I don't know that number.
Resistance training. Those values are based because when you resistance train, to create muscle protein synthesis, you need additional amino acids. If you don't have basically the amino acids are your building blocks of muscle. So what you're talking about in the guidelines you're given are the ability to stabilize at maintenance. When you're talking about building additional muscle, it would be like saying, I'm going to build a house and I have this amount of wood. Well, I want to expand the size of this house. I don't have enough wood. So if you don't have enough of the building blocks to increase the size, you're not going to be able to do so. So yeah, what you're talking about are guidelines for this average sedentary individual.
Okay, so I'm vegetarian. I'm vegan actually, and I'm older now, and I can't eat as much protein. I can't eat that much food anymore. I mean, how does one? And so as you get older, as you know, your stomach shrinks, and so the calorie ratio there's a little bit more art, right? We don't want to waste our calories for rice. I often tell patients, don't waste your calories because you can't eat that much. How do you advise people to get that protein in, especially since we want to keep our saturated on my patients? And what I advocate is very low saturated fat. And so if I want my patients to eat low saturated fat, what are you advising? Are you advising people to take in protein drinks? How do we get the protein? Because and let's maybe do the exercise as a math question. So if a person is, 40 years old, let's put a 40-year-old woman, and she is 150 pounds. Let's make the numbers easy for us. And you said that the ideal body weight, a woman has 20 to 25% fat. So that's say 0.2. So we could say that's 30 pounds of it is fat. So her ideal weight may have been 120 pounds, hypothetically. Does that
Well, no. So we're basing it on what the ideal body weight would be at 20% body fat. So
okay.
Usually a 150-pound woman, I'm assuming that's not a lean woman at that point, or maybe it is. But that probably is 30% body fat. So you'd have to just scale that back a little. She's probably, my guess would be you'd be factoring in around 120 or 130 pounds for her to be.
Yes, I think that's great. So that's about 58 kgs or 56 kgs, something like that. I'm terrible at math, but I think it's about 56 kgs. So we say about 56 kgs for this woman, and she wants to, and you want her to get 1.6 grams per kg. That's nearly
80 something.
Yeah, 80 grams of protein. So how does she get it?
Well, so I'll talk about non-vegans because it is certainly somewhat easier. But I mean, 4 ounces of chicken has 30 grams of protein. So a 4-ounce piece of chicken or fish or any type of meat. So if you're going to have 6 ounces, you're talking about 45 grams. You're more than halfway there, which is one meal. So it really is not very difficult. You have egg whites. Let's say you want to take out some saturated fat. You have egg whites in the morning. You have a 6 egg white omelet, which is not it. People think, oh my God, 6 egg whites is just a basic omelet. You're talking, again, 25 grams of protein. So it really is not that difficult.
Okay. Now
Now,
try
it
it
is
on the
more
plant
difficult for
of a
vegans,
vegan.
particularly vegans. Yeah, so vegans do tend, number one, to get more fiber, which is going to make it somewhat more difficult to eat a lot of food. Look, here's what I would say. It's often not that difficult, but if it is, I'm not a big supplement person. To me, I'm a food first person, that you should try to get most of your calories from food, because food not only, and when I talk about food, we're talking about whole foods, not ultra processed foods. But
Right.
They have nutrients. They have, particularly in plants, you can get phytochemicals, polyphenols, and various other nutrients that you generally don't get from shakes. But if you're not able to get a sufficient amount of protein, then shakes are a viable source. And soy protein in particular, and there's other mycoproteins. There's a lot of vegetable proteins that are complete proteins, and that would be very fulfilling for what you're looking to do.
Yeah, I found your number to be so high, 1.6, but I find it very interesting. And as somebody who likes to consider myself fairly fit, I do struggle with building muscle, and I get tired. And so these numbers are not exactly me, but I was just sort of thinking, how does one, in a lot of my patients, they really struggle with getting their protein intake in, especially when I give them a number like 1.2, they can't even imagine getting that much protein in. And so it's interesting to think about it hypothetically, like how do you get all that protein in?
Well, and one of the good things, if you're having trouble with supplements, with a shake, let's say, is that it's not very filling. So liquid foods, basically, they don't need the transport through the gut is very easy. They don't have to be broken down in the gut, and they don't have fiber, and they don't have other nutrients that are going to delay gastric emptying. So you're going to be able to take it in more quickly. That's why, by the way, why you want to stay away from liquids like juices, et cetera, if you want to lose weight. They're not a good source of food if you're looking to lose weight. But from a muscle building standpoint, to get enough protein in, if you're having trouble, supplements certainly are a viable option. Like I said, to me, try to get what you can through your diet, but you can easily take a 30-gram protein shake and it doesn't even phase you.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And there's some really clean protein out there nowadays where you can get something, where you can get a decent amount of protein and I do find that sometimes people are hungry, especially plant-based people are hungry. What they're looking for is something more solid, need a little bit more protein and maybe a little bit more fat. But that when they often do is reach for those empty carbs, and they then have their elevated triglycerides. And that's something that I struggle with in getting people to sort of focus in on the right macronutrients. So that's helpful and a good thought exercise. So thank you. So I'd like to shift, maybe not shift, is maybe bring up at this point, like, what do you think about creatine? I mean, I don't know. You've written about creatine. I've seen some papers on it. I think you're a supporter, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are and why.
Yeah, so again, I'm not a huge supplement person in general, but from a muscle building standpoint, creatine is the one supplement that has true efficacy. There's quite good evidence that creatine does or can help with muscle building. And by the way, particularly someone like yourself, given that you're a vegan. So it's those who are, creatine is in meat products. So people who eat a lot of meat tend not to see as good benefits or sometimes no benefits. So about 30%, depending on the study you look at, 30% are non-responders. And usually those are the ones who are taking in more meat products. And alternatively, those who are vegans do see better results from it. So there are nutritive factors that do enter into this. But yeah, creatine helps to, or can help to build muscle and strength. So that's certainly positive. Now, it's not, some people make it out like you're going to get steroid-like effects from these. It's a supplement. It's kind of, to me, any supplement is going to be the, no pun intended, but the cherry on top of the sundae. It's going to help you to optimize, not be a substitute for hard training or for other things. So if you're not training hard, you're not going to get any benefits out of it, not resistance training. Now,
so do you see any negatives to creatine?
Well, I was going to say, but before getting into that, there's other outside of somewhat out of my sphere of expertise, but there are studies that do show it has brain benefits, that there are other health-related benefits. And again, I've seen the literature on this, but I haven't delved into it enough. It's somewhat outside of my area of expertise. Now, downsides, I mean, there's a cost to it. Some people do experience some cramping, bloating from it that can be, somewhat upset some people's stomachs. There's ways to mix it in with foods, et cetera, that can help. But I mean, really all the literature on it, and there's been studies that have been over a year, really has very little side effects and certainly no long-term adverse effects that I would be concerned at. Now,
well, it's just interesting.
40-year studies on it, so who knows? But I would certainly think with the literature we have, it would be, I would doubt that there would be anything that would come up over time.
No, but this is helpful. So, because, every kid I see in my clinic, or, I see a decent number of kids because I take care of complex lipid or cholesterol problems. And so I see a lot of kids, and every other boy who walks in the door seems to be taking creatine right now. But I think what I took away from this conversation just now was get the protein from your food and try to really emphasize those whole proteins, right? Because in whole foods, because you can get so many other beneficial nutrients, right? So we can't forget that important impact of those foods for having all those health benefits. And then if you feel like you need a little bit of extra, maybe that quote unquote cherry on top, that creatine might be okay. But we only have 1 year of data, no long-term studies. So we don't know what the long-term implications of creatine are, but in the short term, it does seem to be okay. Does that sound about right?
I think that's fair.
Okay, so that's good. That's very helpful. I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about VO2. I think a lot of my patients ask me about the Apple Watch. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what VO2 is and what it means. And then maybe tell us about what you think of the Apple Watch, telling us what our VO2s are, how accurate that is. And I'm not suggesting that you are a Apple expert, but what are your thoughts on sort of people following their VO2s and how does one increase a VO2?
Yeah, all good questions. So VO2 max is your ability to take in and utilize oxygen. It represents your cardiorespiratory fitness. The higher your VO2, the greater your cardiorespiratory fitness. Which one to start with? Well, as far as how to measure it, I mean, there is a lab in our research lab. We do that with a mask. Basically, you put a mask on, you run what's called a Bruce protocol or a modified Bruce protocol, and you can collect gases and actually directly look at this. Your Apple Watch has an indirect measure. Now, again, I haven't really delved seriously into the literature, but I've seen some studies, and it's not, as you'd imagine, it's not a direct measure. It is not certainly as accurate as a lab measure, but I mean, I think it underestimates, as I recall, your VO2. So probably whatever it's showing, your VO2 is a little bit higher or somewhat higher. But I mean, from what I did glean, and again, I don't want to speak definitively on this because it's somewhat out of my area of expertise, and I haven't really delved into all the literature or seen meta-analyses on this, but it gives a decent gauge. So it's not like it's worthless. I think these types of things, kind of like I have a Fitbit watch, and it gives the oxygen saturation, like how you sleep. And again, from what I understand, it's certainly not like your like pulse oximetry, but you're going to get a decent gauge.
It's sort of like a nice indirect measurement, or at least gives us some guidelines.
Correct. And the question is how to improve it. Aerobic. So first of all, resistance training will, to some extent, improve cardiorespiratory fitness, depending somewhat on how it's performed, the way you're carrying out your training. But it's certainly not. Aerobic training is going to be your modality. There's what's called a principle of specificity. The more specific an activity is to your outcome, the greater the transfer is. And aerobic training has a greater specificity towards VO2 max. And if you want to enhance your VO2 max, you need to do aerobic exercise. And the harder you train, so doing things like aerobic interval training, high intensity interval training, where you're doing, let's say, running and then walking. So running for a minute and then walking for a minute will optimize that as opposed to just jogging or walking. So it's a dose response. Walking certainly can help to improve it up to a certain point, but if you want to optimize VO2 max, the harder you train, the greater the specificity will be.
Yeah, that was super helpful. I really like that answer. I think people are so interested and intrigued by this topic. So I'm sure people are always asking you, like, well, what's the optimal, what's this and how do you do this? And so I appreciate some of this great conversation that you're providing us. What do you think is the optimal regimen for maybe the average 40 to 60-year-old? Is there one that you could put in lump together? Like, how many days should people focus on cardio? How many days should they resistance train? And then I guess the next question to add to that is there a benefit in doing this, giving yourself that day break in between muscle groups?
So I think we need to distinguish between optimal and satisfactory.
Okay.
And because optimal is, first of all, you can't give it optimal because that would be specific to an individual, and there's going to be so many factors that go into that. But most people will not want to do or even be able to do what would be optimal. And I think the fact that most people are sedentary and don't even get enough aerobic exercise in, and I think only 20% of the population does muscle strengthening activities or meets guidelines for muscle strengthening. So I'd start by saying that anything is better than nothing. A minimum, with resistance training, your one set is going to get you more results. It has the biggest upside. And then each successive amount of sets thereafter will get you increasingly diminished results. You still can, there's a dose response, but it's not a linear curve. It's a descending curve. It will have a start to plateau, whereas just doing something is going to get you the majority of results. And similarly with aerobic training. Now, aerobic training, we'll start with that, would depend what you're going to do. So if you're going to walk, you're going to need to walk a lot longer than if you're going to do high intensity interval training. If you want a minimalistic routine, you can do much less exercise by doing intervals. Now, a lot of people either don't like doing the intervals because they're uncomfortable and to run, or you don't even have to run. You could do biking intervals, you could do step intervals, etc., Stairmaster. But if you're either not able to do it or don't like doing it, there's a duration intensity trade-off. If you're going to do lower intensity, you're going to have to do a higher duration to get similar results. And that goes both for pretty much for everything, but certainly for VO2 max and fat loss as well. From a resistance training standpoint, I would say that probably 2 days or 2 half-hour sessions per week. And this is why people think, oh my God, I don't have time to resistance train. You can get most people can get a majority of their benefits from doing 2 half-hour weekly sessions for the entire body. Basically one set with a high amount of effort, training relatively close to what we call muscle failure. So really challenging the muscles by the end of that set. 9 or 10 different exercises in that session. Really huge gains in a short period of time. Now, you're likely not going to step on stage as a bodybuilder with that routine. Again, if you want more results, you're going to need to do more. There is this dose-response relationship, particularly for muscle hypertrophy. But like I said, I think for most people, especially given that most people don't even exercise at all, that will give them all the results they need. And certainly from a health standpoint, you're going to get the majority of your benefits.
No, it's great. So, I think because I do feel many people I talk to will say that they feel like they have to do 4 or 5 days of strength training, and then they're not really doing very much aerobic exercise. And I think, they have it flip-flopped. And so I appreciate you saying that there's a lot of benefit for 2 30-minute sessions, which which I think is really important for people to hear, is that just add in anything. Anything is better than nothing. But if you can get in, like if you're really looking for a goal, 230s are really good. And where one of them you focus on muscle failure or muscle fatigue, I think that that's a really good point to make. And I also liked your point to go back a little to remind us that HIIT training, it sounds like you're advising as a better exercise option than people who are jogging or doing just sort of one regular exercise, because you're really sort of challenging yourself. And so also gives you a benefit of will increase your VO2 more than somebody who goes for a jog. I thought those were really good points.
Let me, that's not exactly what I would say, because I'm huge on the most important thing with training is adherence. So as I mentioned, some people don't like HIIT exercise. So I would not say that. I would say this, that HIIT training, high intensity interval training, will help to optimize cardiorespiratory fitness, so your VO2 max, but you can still get very nice VO2 max improvements with lower intensity exercise. And again, to me, the most important thing is giving people things they will stick with. And that's why if you tell them, well, you only have to resistance train twice a week, I'm a huge fan of step counts. Where you don't even have to necessarily look at structured cardiovascular exercise. If you just are active, physically active, there's been meta-analyses on these, and somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 steps, which isn't all that much. So meta-analyses show that's where like an inflection point happens. And you do continue to see gains above that, improvements in overall health and mortality, but it will start to plateau off. So you get your biggest, if you can just stay physically active, taking steps for, let's say, 4,000 or 5,000. If you can up that to 7,000, 8,000, and then get over 10,000 to really optimize it. But just think about being active and doing muscle strengthening. To me, those are the most important things. And I think certainly most people can find time in their day to get up and walk around. I have 2 doggies. That gives me a lot of steps in my day. So these are all things that I think are kind of hacks to make sure that you're getting in your necessary activity.
That's great. I appreciate that. So, and I thank you for the clarification. Any exercise is better than nothing, right? Any movement. In fact, there's cardio studies that show that even 2,000 extra steps per day can really impact and improve your mortality. So I love that. I'm going to ask you one last topic, and then I thought we'd close for the day, but I wanted to talk about a subject that you recently talked about, or I've seen you talk about, which is cold water immersion, because that's become quite popular as well. And a lot of my patients are using it as a post, reducing inflammation, but sort of for maybe these anti-inflammatory effects. What do you think about it? Does it work? And what do you think is the right cold water immersion? What do you think about that too?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying that the literature, we recently did a meta-analysis on this, somewhat mixed, and the thought that it really helps to reduce inflammation is not well supported at this point. Yeah. So if that's your reason for doing it, I think that's certainly something you might want to reconsider. The literature on cold immersion is not really compelling. So when we talk about recovery, muscle damage, etc., has not been shown to be certainly a highly effective strategy, and sometimes not at all. And actually heat seems to be more effective for recovery. And it actually has negative effects on muscle building and strength. So one of the issues with cold water immersion is that it reduces blood flow to the musculature. And blood flow is what enhances recovery. That's how your nutrients get delivered to the tissues to promote recovery. If you're going to reduce blood flow, if you're going to constrict vessels, that's going to impair your body's recovery ability. And that's been demonstrated actually in several studies. And to the opposite, heat application seems to have certainly non-negative effects, and certainly in some studies, positive effects. So to me, if you want to actually enhance your recovery, take a sauna or get in a hot tub would be a better alternative. Now, I will say this, that the studies that we have, certainly that I've looked at, are more specific to exercise. Doing that in the absence of exercise, I'm not really sure. It's something I haven't looked into, so I don't know how that would mitigate, and affect results. But I don't think that blunting blood flow to tissues is ever really a good thing. So
that's great. Great answer. I thought I'd have you close with something that people always love, which is like, what are two things that you think, besides sort of any movement is good movement, what would be one or two other tips you'd leave people with to close out?
Well, I think I touched on them. Number one, incorporate some type of muscle strengthening activity. And that really comes down to resistance training, which people sometimes think means they need to lift barbells and dumbbells. That can be machines, that can be cables, that can be resistance bands, that can be body weight. You can do push-ups and squat thrusts or just body weight squats, and, assisted chin-ups. There's ways to do all sorts of body weight movements, but do some type of muscle strengthening, a minimum twice a week for the major muscle groups of your body, focusing on the major muscle groups of the body. I think that is essential. If there's one health promoting effect, I would say. And the other thing that I think is really important is, well, there's so many things that we could talk about, is to adopt or reduce your consumption of highly processed foods. I think the vast majority of people would benefit, particularly things like sodas. We have an obesity epidemic. I think the last research that I saw showed over 2/3 of Americans are overweight and over 1/3 are obese. It comes down to energy in, energy out to a large extent. And highly processed foods are really our number one enemy in this point because they're highly palatable and people overeat them. So people don't realize how much they are eating. It's just fun to eat when you're eating Twinkies and Ho-Hos. So I think
chips, right? Everybody's big thing is chips. I feel like chips.
Yeah. So these are things that if you just reduce, or I would say my general rule here is 80 to 90% whole foods. And then if you want to, whatever you want after that is fine. You can quote unquote cheat a little, but the majority of your food should be from unprocessed or minimally processed foods.
It's great. Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, such a pleasure to have him and have you on the show. Take a look at his Instagram. He's got like millions of followers, and his book. But what I like about him in particular is that, and like about you, Brad, is that you're not just sort of, there are a lot of people out there that are saying a whole lot of stuff. But you're backing yourself up by doing the science, reading the science. And so if you're looking for some credible sources of how to build muscle and how to understand the science behind a lot of the muscle building and aerobic exercise and exercise in general for optimal health, take a look at his website, his Instagram. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Brad. Thank you so much for your time. And all of your contact information so that people can reach out to, not to reach out to you, but your social will all be in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.